All right, everyone. Hi, I'm Kim. I'm an alcoholic, and I'm also the executive director at the Wilson House of East Dorset, Vermont. And we're so grateful to be a part of this incredible program that's a hybrid and a in-depth big book study with Ray J. And if you're inclined to contribute as a, part of the sort of basket giving, your contributions will support the Wilson House, which is the birthplace of Bill W., co-founder of AA. So I'm going to show you an 11-minute video, which is a little rough. We just kind of threw it together. We're not pro, videographers. So please forgive us for like rocky situations. You'll get the real feel. You'll feel like you're really there because it's very very real. All right, so without further ado, here's the video about the Wilson House.
Can y'all hear it? We can't hear it.
No video, no audio. Kim.
All right, apologies. Okay, audio. I'm going to try it again. Okay, I'm going to do it on my other screen.
Kind of strange. It was
Out of curiosity, do you have that video locally on your machine when
we
you're
were
playing?
trying to do a video, and so we had the whole screen.
Guys, can you hear me? Yeah, okay.
I can hear you, but when there's no
I
video.
can hear you.
All right, but the video wasn't working.
You want to narrate it?
Well, I can try, I guess.
Try narrating it, what Sean's doing, where he's standing, etc.
Yeah, I'm gonna try. I'm just gonna try one more thing. I'm really sorry, guys.
It's all right.
It's okay, Kim. Thank you for all that you do. Seriously.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. I appreciate it.
Okay. Can you see my screen? Yes. Can you guys see the screen?
We can see Sean in front of the sign.
Okay.
Yes.
Because that's what happens when you're shooting live. I'm Sean, I'm an alcoholic here.
Can you hear it?
Wilson House of East Dorset.
Yes, we can hear it.
Yes, we can
All right.
hear it.
On the line, which marks this as a historic landmark, the birthplace of William Griffith Wilson, 1895 to 1971, which ironically is the year I was born as well.
This is their screen.
He was born in November 26th, right around Thanksgiving, in a room behind the bar. He was born at 3 a.m., weighed 6 3/4 pounds. It was a really, really difficult delivery for his mother, Emily. And, I guess it kind of set the tone for what was to come. But East Dorset is a beautiful little village. We're going to walk up onto the porch.
Starting now.
This is just before
A little panorama going up. Walk up onto the porch, which this is where people like to come and sit when you're on your way to come to a meeting, come to a retreat, or just to come to hang out on a Wednesday morning. Come and just rock. and watch the comings and goings in the house. So the Wilson House was built in 1852. It was a whistle stop on the Rutland Railroad. The railroad was laid in 1852. About the same year they started it. Ira Cochran is the one who actually built the house. He was a great build. There goes a big logging truck. Wilson House was built in 1852 by Ira Cochran, who was a great of Bill's. It was originally built with 28 rooms. It was the East Dorset Hotel, and it was just a whistle stop on the Rutland Railroad, which was built about the same year. And that's why I built it, because Mount Aeolus, which is, you can't see it through the trees now, but Mount Aeolus has 29 marble quarries. This was definitely a quarrying town. A lot of French Canadians, a lot of Italians, a lot of migrant workers who came and went. And when you walked in, walk across the threshold. Originally, when you would have come into this room, you would have gone into the parlor, and this is where the bar room was. And what's kind of cool, what you'll see in a minute, is they had the original bar top that was in this room, in the large meeting room above the chair table. And so the bar would have been here. In the back room behind the bar, this would have originally been partitioned off. And this room is where Bill was born. And we keep the lamp on in the corner 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, in his memory. We have a number of things on display, old pictures of what East Dorset looked like during Bill's day. We have the Kimball parlor organ here, which was actually a wedding gift to Bill's mother and father. They were actually married here in 1894, the year before Bill was born. Over in that front, we have a little display case with his mother's diploma, some of the pieces from his childhood, which were a gift of the family of Dr. Leonard Strong, who was married to Bill's sister, Dorothy. So if you come here, you'll be able to see some of the personal belongings to Bill and his mother, and to Dr. Strong. Dr. Strong, obviously, is a very important person in our history, even though he was not sober. He was Bill's brother-in-law. His last friend introduced him to Dr. Silkworth and paid for all three stays at Towns Hospital, and was on the Alcoholic Foundation and was a sober member of GSO. Because Bill knew that alcoholics are crazy and that there should be a non-alcoholic component to the structure of the General Service Office. Imagine that, crazy alcoholics. So yes, our trusted servants, they still need to have, some voices of reason, I guess you would say. The dining room, this is, to be a fly on the wall here, this is where kind of all the magic happens. On Friday nights, Saturday nights when there's retreats, sometimes Thursday nights, depending, and the breakfast in the morning, if these walls could talk. Over in the back is actually the small library, and that was actually the original kitchen when the house was first reopened by Ozzie Leopard, who came here in 1986, bought the house. Because the kitchen as we know it, which is kind of the heartbeat of the house, which we're going to walk through right now, which is kind of a hallway. And when it was purchased in 1986, there was actually, which is a story that Bonnie used to like to tell a lot when people came, was there was a tree growing up through the floorboards and through a hole in the roof.
Okay, I'm gonna move forward because there is some sort of sound problems in here, and I'm just gonna jump forward to this part.
This actually, and the gifts that we've got in the house, this was a gift from members of a retreat who came here first in 1995, and that retreat is still going on, as well as a dishwasher and a bunch of other things. So, the gifts that have come to the house come in all shapes and sizes. I look around here and think about the tens of thousands of man and woman hours that went in, putting love back into this place to make it what it is today. It's not always the dollars, and people would send whenever we needed.
Just gonna go forward a little bit.
This is where there's Al-Anon meetings meet in here. My home group actually meets in here at the men's retreat on Tuesday nights at 6:30 if you're in the area. And this is actually, the room was dedicated. It's the only room that's actually dedicated to any person. All the houses, all the other rooms are just, the rooms that have their value, but this actually has a plaque in it dedicated to Ozzy and Bonnie, who were trusted stewards of the Wilson house. And a great picture of them in the kitchen. And then a nice piece that was written in a picture of Ozzy walking through the garden across the way. Ozzy passed away in 2005 of cancer, and Bonnie left us in 2019. But yeah, this room, and again, that was another donation where somebody wanted to. It needed a little updating, let's just say.
Okay, we're gonna skip forward again.
In the large meeting room, the meeting house. This is where it all really happens. One time.
Kim, if you mute yourself, it mutes the sound.
People who come in and spend hours in this room. I mean, this is really, the soul of the house. And this was actually the carriage. This is where the horses would stay back when it was, back before the days before automobiles. The license plates that you see all around are, have either AA, Al-Anon, or other 12-step sayings. We figured out most of them. There's still a couple that I get asked about, like, where is that one hanging? That I haven't figured out, or they say 1935, which was the year the AA was founded. There are photos from 1993, and there are none, with the exception of like 2 license plate, one that had a saying on it, and then one with a 1935. So it's really been since the early 1990s, and they keep coming in. And we keep hanging them. We still have a lot of rafters to go. And probably one of the things that I like the most about being at meetings here, and which I think most people would see most, is up on our table. I'll show you this great thing where the meetings are chaired from. This great sign that says "You are not alone." So when you sit out in the chairs, this is what you see. But what's really cool is if you ever chaired a meeting here, is what's written on the back of it. And if you're in the hot seat on a speaker meeting on a Saturday night, take a deep breath, have faith, you are not sitting here alone. And that is what's always neat when you're sitting up, looking out onto the room. I know during the pandemic, there were a couple of occasions that I came in here and told my story, on Zoom to meetings around the country, one international. And to sit here in a room at 8 o'clock on a Saturday night and have it be completely empty was both moving and a little spooky, I will admit.
And that's it for me. Thank you so much for your patience.
Thank you, Kim
Problems.
Thanks, Kim.
and Sean.
I'll tell Sean he did a great job, and I'll tell him that I struggled with the Zoom, but I hope you could hear a little bit and learn a little bit about the Wilson
Oh,
house.
yeah. Yeah, you did good.
Okay, thank you.
Good. Are you turning it over now to Lael? Turning
Turning
the
it-
co-chair?
Yep,
Great.
turning it over.
You got it, Ray.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ray and I'm an alcoholic. Thank you, Sean and Kim, for that presentation from the Wilson House. All right, I'm going to read this set-aside prayer before I get into the book. Dear God, please set aside everything I think I know about myself, this book, my disease, these steps, and especially about you, dear God, so that I might have an open mind and a new experience with all these things. Please help me to see the truth. All right, last week we ended up with Violet's spiritual experience, but I didn't say if we had this spiritual experience, let's go to page 84 and see how it affects us. And this is after you've completed the first 9 steps. And I'm at the last paragraph on 84. And we have ceased fighting anything or anyone, even alcohol, for by this time sanity will have returned. We will seldom be interested in liquor. If tempted, we recoil from it as from a hot flame. We react sanely and normally, and we will find that this has happened automatically. We will see that our new attitude toward liquor has been given us without any thought or effort on our part. It just comes. That is the miracle of it. We are not fighting it, neither are we avoiding temptation. We feel as though we have been placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. We have not even sworn off. Instead, the problem has been removed. It does not exist for us. We are neither cocky nor are we afraid. That is our experience. That is how we react so long as we keep in fit spiritual condition. Remember, what we've been dealing with is the spiritual malady. That's what brought on the alcoholism. That was with us before we ever took a drink. So, and if you'll notice, he says these things have happened automatically. We didn't set out to do all this. I just set out to do the steps and try to learn how to not drink. And all this came from that. Does that make sense to y'all? All right, let's go to page 30. More about alcoholism. Most of us have been unwilling to admit we were real alcoholics. And now we learned last week what a real alcoholic was. It's someone who can't stop or moderate. No person likes to think he is bodily and mentally different from his fellows. Therefore, it is not surprising that our drinking careers have been characterized by countless vain attempts to prove we could drink like other people. The idea that somehow, someday he will control and enjoy his drinking is the great obsession of every abnormal drinker. The persistence of this illusion is astonishing. Many pursue it into the gates of insanity or death. He just told us that an obsession is an illusion. We learned that we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. What does innermost selves mean? In my gut, not in my head. I got to know in my gut that I am an alcoholic. It's my opinion that probably 85% of the people sober in Alcoholics Anonymous today do not understand the first step, what it means to be alcoholic. Because if we did, we would be running to find God. Because I'm powerless. I'm beyond human aid. I have no defense. This is the first step in recovery. Now, we just read about the obsession being an illusion. Now he says the delusion that we are like other people or presently maybe has to be smashed. I am not like other people. Earlier we read we were abnormal. I don't know about you, but I was abnormal. We alcoholics are men and women who have lost the ability to control our drinking. All of us felt at times that we were regaining control, but such intervals, usually brief, were inevitably followed by still less control, which led in time to pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization. Alcoholics always understand those words. Nobody else does. And we're not like other people. You know, I had a guy that was going to finish up a bunch of his amends, and he went and made his amends, and he said, most of the people didn't even remember what I was talking about. You and I get a resentment, we take it to the grave. We are not like other people. Look, 31, second sentence of the first full paragraph. By every form of self-deception and experimentation, they will try to prove themselves exceptions to the rule, therefore non-alcoholic. The rule. Once I start, can I control it? And when I stop, can I stay and stop? No, my answer was no to either one of those. And you notice he used another term, self-deception. So now we've used in a page, we've used illusion, delusion, and self-deception. What's the book trying to tell me? I'm never going to drink on the truth. For me to drink on the truth, I'd have to walk in the liquor store and say, wow, I haven't been to jail or divorce court in quite a while. I'd like that pretty bottle right there, because that's where I go when I drink. I am not going to do that. I am going to lie to myself. I'm going to be. So we have to see what the book's telling us. I'm going down to the last paragraph on 31. We do not like to pronounce any individual as alcoholic, but you can quickly diagnose yourself. If you meet an alcoholic and he's willing to go through the first 31 pages with you, and he still doesn't think this applies to him, then you can tell him, step over to the nearest bar room and try some controlled drinking. Try to drink and stop abruptly. Try it more than once. He'll find out pretty quickly. If he's one of us, he'll find out pretty quickly about it. Though there is no, I'm at the next paragraph, though there is no way of proving it, we believe that early in our drinking careers, most of us could have stopped drinking. Last sentence on that same paragraph. Here is one. He's going to give us an example. A man of 30 was doing a great deal of spree drinking. He was very nervous in the morning after these bouts and quieted himself with more liquor. He was ambitious to succeed in business, but saw that he would get nowhere if he drank at all. Once he started, he had no control whatever. He made up his mind that until he had been successful in business and had retired, he would not touch another drop. An exceptional man, he remained bone dry for 25 years and retired at the age of 55 after a successful and happy business career. Then he fell victim to a belief which practically every alcoholic has, that his long period of sobriety and self-discipline had qualified him to drink as other men. Out came his carpet slippers and a bottle. In 2 months, he was in a hospital, puzzled and humiliated. He tried to regulate his drinking for a while, making several trips to the hospital meantime. Then, gathering all his forces, he attempted to stop altogether and found he could not. Every means of solving his problem which money could buy was at his disposal. Every attempt failed. Though a robust man at retirement, he went to pieces quickly and was dead within 4 years. This case contains a powerful lesson. It gives us a warning. Most of us have believed that if we remained sober for a long stretch, we could thereafter drink normally. But here is a man who at 55 years found he was just where he had left off at 30. We have seen the truth demonstrated again and again. Once an alcoholic, always an alcoholic. Commencing to drink after a period of sobriety, we are in a short time as bad as ever. If we are planning to stop drinking, there must be no reservation of any kind or any lurking notion that someday he will be immune to alcohol. My sponsor asked me, do you have any reservation? Maybe if I was 65 and I had cancer and they told me I was only going to live 3 months, maybe I'd drink. He said, you know what you'll do with that reservation? You'll walk out of here, trip and stumble down and get hurt and convince yourself you have cancer and be drunk tonight. That's what we do. That's why that's why we're mentally powerless over alcohol. Because we tell ourselves illusion, delusion, self-deception, call it what you want to call it. Now he says young people. Then a little further down on that page, he says this is particularly true of women. What he's trying to show us is this happens to men, it happens to women, it happens to old people, it happens to young people. It happens. I drank when all my ducks were in a row, and I drank when all my ducks weren't in a row. I drank when I was happy, I drank when I was sad. It's an internal disease. It's not external. I didn't drink because, you know, they say don't drink no matter what. Alcoholics drink no matter what. It doesn't matter. The book's trying to show us this. Look what all he's describing to us. Page 34, middle paragraph. For those who are unable to drink moderately, the question is how to stop altogether. We are assuming, of course, that the reader desires to stop. Whether such a person can quit upon a non-spiritual basis depends upon the extent to which he has already lost the power to choose whether he will drink or not. I don't know about you guys, but I didn't give up early. I took alcohol as far as I could. And what that means is there's people in AA, I know people in AA, they go to meetings, they read the book, they haven't taken the steps, and they're sober. I'm a real alcoholic. I can't do that. I have to take all the directions out of this book. I cannot stop drinking on a non-spiritual basis. I am absolutely convinced of that. I'll tell you what helps convince me. Go to page 172. First paragraph on page 172. This is Dr. Bob's nightmare. Unfortunately for me, I was the only child, which perhaps engendered the selfishness which played such an important part in bringing on my alcoholism. Dr. Bob just told us that selfishness caused his alcoholism. Go down further on that same page. In the next, let's see, that was the first paragraph, second paragraph, the third paragraph, way down into it, it says, my whole life seemed to be centered around doing what I wanted to do without regard for the rights, wishes, or privileges of anyone else, a state of mind which became more and more predominant as the years passed. That was me. I did what I wanted to do when I wanted to do it without regards of anybody else. That was before I ever had a drink. It just got worse when I was drinking, but believe me, that's what I was like before that. Let's just make a quick stop on page 62. First full paragraph. Selfishness, self-centeredness. That, I think, is the root of Ray's troubles. Now, do you see what we're talking about? You see why? That's why I have to have, it has to be spiritual if I'm going to recover. Because I am beyond human aid. I took it there. I can't blame that on anybody else. let's statement from my story. I was sober my first 15 years of life and I hated it. So nobody's going to tell me that sobriety is going to be my answer. It isn't. And he's going to say this in a little while. I'll show you. Let's go to top of 35. So we shall describe some of the mental states that precede a relapse into drinking. For obviously, this is the crux of the problem. The crux of the problem happens when I'm sober, not when I'm drinking. We already know why I'm physically powerless over alcohol. We learned about the phenomenon of craving in the doctor's opinion. But now we're talking about the alcoholic with no alcohol in him. What sort of thinking dominates an alcoholic who repeats time after time the desperate experiment of the first drink? Friends who have reasoned with him after a spree which has brought him to the point of divorce or bankruptcy are mystified when he walks directly into a saloon. Why does he? What is he thinking? Now they're going to give us another example. They're going to tell us about Jim. Jim's quite interesting. Our first example is a friend we shall call Jim. This man has a charming wife and family. He inherited a lucrative automobile agency. He had a commendable World War record. He is a good salesman. Everybody likes him. He is an intelligent man, normal so far as we can see, except for a nervous disposition. You ever met an alcoholic that didn't have a nervous disposition? He did no drinking until he was 35. In a few years, he became so violent when intoxicated that he had to be committed. On leaving the rehab, he came into contact with us. They say asylum, but that's rehab nowadays. We told him what we knew of alcoholism and the answer we had found. He made a beginning. Turn to page 63 a minute. Third paragraph, 1, 2, 3, fourth sentence. This is step 3. This was only a beginning. So maybe Jim might have got to step 3 because it said he made a beginning. His family was reassembled and he began to work as a salesman for the business he had lost through drinking. Uh-oh. All went well for a time, but he failed to enlarge his spiritual life. Let's turn to page 14. Very last sentence at the end of page 14. For if an alcoholic failed to perfect and enlarge his spiritual life through work and self-sacrifice for others, he could not survive the certain trials and low spots ahead. There are going to be trials and low spots. We have nothing to do with them. We just went through a pandemic. That's a trial and a low spot. And if I'm not enlarging my spiritual life, I'm not going to get through those periods. I have to enlarge my spiritual life through completing steps 4 through 9. That's what they're all about. They're to treat. Let's turn to page 64 a minute. Third chapter. Resentment is the #1 offender. It, meaning resentment, destroys more alcoholics than anything else. Certainly it can't destroy more alcoholics than alcohol, can it? But that's what it says. From it, meaning from resentment, stem all forms of spiritual disease. For we have been not only mentally, my obsession, and physically, my craving, I have been spiritually sick. When the spiritual malady is overcome, Ray straightens out mentally and physically. I don't have to work on my mental and I don't have to work on my physical. All I have to work on is my spiritual. How about you guys? All right. To his consternation, I'm back on page 35, reading about Jim again. To his consternation, he found himself drunk a half a dozen times in rapid succession. On each of these occasions, we worked with him. He just got drunk a half a dozen times, and they didn't fire him. They worked with him each time after he had drank. We don't turn our back on the wounded. Reviewing carefully what had happened, he agreed he was a real alcoholic and in a serious condition. He knew he faced another trip to the rehab if he kept on. Moreover, he would lose his family for whom he had a deep affection. Yet he got drunk again. Now Jim's going to tell us what happened. He decides to go to a bar where he's been many times during the months he's been sober, and he thought he might find somebody to buy him a car. He could sell a car. And in squiggly writing on page 36, in the second full paragraph, it says, suddenly the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. Does that sound like an illusion, delusion, or self-deception? I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart, but felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. Now do you see why we have no mental defense against the first drink? He was sober when he made this decision. Thus started one more journey to the rehab. Last sentence, squiggly writing. He had much knowledge about himself as an alcoholic, yet all reasons for not drinking were easily pushed aside in the favor of the foolish idea that he could take whiskey if only he mixed it with milk. Whatever the precise definition of the word may be, we call this plain insanity. They talk about alcoholic insanity, and we think it's the stuff we did when we're drinking. That's not what they're talking about. My sponsor asked me one time, what's the craziest thing you ever did? And I said, well, I was going to Van Nuys and I ended up in Las Vegas. And I didn't know how I'd gotten there. He said, that's not the craziest thing you ever did. He said, the craziest thing you ever did is you decided, stone cold sober, to have a drink after having DUIs, accidents, divorces. Wow. How can such a lack of proportion of the ability to think straight be called anything else? You may think it's an extreme case. To us, it is not far-fetched, for this kind of thinking has been characteristic of every single one of us. Let's go down to the last paragraph at the bottom of the page. They're going to talk about the jaywalker, but I'm going to read about me, where he uses jaywalk and I'm going to use alcohol. Ray's behavior is as absurd and incomprehensible with respect to the first drink as that of an individual with a passion, say, for jaywalking. Ray gets a thrill out of drinking. He enjoys himself a few years in spite of friendly warnings. Up to this point, you would label him a foolish chap having queer ideas of fun. Luck then deserts Ray, and he is slightly injured in a few car accidents while drinking and driving. You would expect him, if he were normal, to cut it out. Presently, Ray gets in another accident, and this time he's physically hurt. Within a week after leaving the hospital, Ray goes out to the bar, drinks again, and gets in another accident. He tells you he has decided to stop drinking for good, but in a few weeks he gets a DUI. On through the years, this conduct continues, accompanied by his continual promises to be careful or not drink at all. Finally, he can no longer work. His wife gets a divorce and he is held up to ridicule. He tries every known means to get the drinking idea out of his head. Ray shuts himself up in a rehab, hoping to mend his ways. But the day he comes out, he races to a bar and gets in another accident, which breaks his back. Such a man would be crazy, wouldn't he? When I first read about the jaywalker, I thought, I'm not joining it. These people are nuts. But if I put my drinking for the jaywalking, I'm as crazy as the jaywalker. Can you all see that? You may think this illustration is too ridiculous, but is it? We who have been through the ringer have to admit that if we substituted alcoholism for jaywalking, the illustration would fit us exactly. However intelligent we may have been in other respects, where alcohol has been involved, Ray has been strangely insane. It's strong language, but isn't it true? Some of you are thinking, yes, what you tells us is true, but it doesn't fully apply. I admit that I have some of these symptoms, but I have not gone to the extremes you fellow did, nor am I likely to, for I understand myself so well that after what you've told me, such things cannot happen again. I have not lost everything in life through drinking, and certainly do not intend to. Thanks for the information. That may be true of certain non-alcoholic people who, though drinking foolishly and heavy at the present time, are able to stop or moderate because their brains and bodies have not been damaged as mine was. I told you I took drinking as far as I could. In 2013, I had third stage throat cancer. And my ear, nose, and throat doctor said, Ray, did you ever drink heavily? I told him how much I drank. He said, did you ever smoke heavily? I told him how much I smoked. And he handed me a book with research in it. I had a 78% chance of having throat cancer. That was the research. If you drank the way I drank and smoked the way I smoked, that was going to happen. My body's been damaged through my alcoholism. But the actual or potential alcoholic, with hardly an exception, will be absolutely unable to stop drinking on the basis of self-knowledge. That's why we're reading this book as a recipe book, to follow what they did. I'm not reading it to learn anything, because self-knowledge is not going to help me. I have to do what they did if I want the result they got. I love Fred. We're going to talk about Fred a minute. So Jim had a resentment. We saw Jim had a resentment and he got drunk. Now we're talking about Fred. Fred's my kind of a guy. He's a high bottom drunk. Fred is partner in a well-known accounting firm. His income is good. He has a fine home. He is happily married and the father of promising children of college age. He has so attractive a personality that he makes friends with everyone. If ever there was a successful businessman, it is Fred. To all appearance, he is a stable, well-balanced individual, yet he is alcoholic. We first saw Fred about a year ago in a hospital where he had gone to recover from a bad case of the jitters. Fred couldn't admit he went to the hospital because of his drinking. That would be too embarrassing. So he went for the jitters. It was his first experience of this kind, and he was much ashamed of it. Far from admitting he was an alcoholic, he told himself he came to the hospital to rest his nerves. Wow, that sounds like illusion, delusion, self-deception. The doctor intimated strongly that he might be worse than he realized. For a few days, he was depressed about his condition. He made up his mind to quit drinking altogether. It never occurred to him that perhaps he could not do so in spite of his character and standing. Fred would not believe himself an alcoholic, much less accept the spiritual remedy for his problem. We told him what we knew about alcoholism. He was interested and conceded that he had some of the symptoms, but he was a long way from admitting that he could do nothing about it himself. He was positive that this humiliating experience, plus the knowledge he had acquired, would keep him sober the rest of his life. Self-knowledge would fix it. So, it's just amazing when you read this stuff. So Fred is on step 9. We heard no more of Fred for a while. One day we were told that he was back in the hospital. Must have had to rest his nerves again. This time he was quite shaky. He soon indicated he was anxious to see us. The story he told us is most instructive, for here was a chap absolutely convinced he had to stop drinking, who had no excuse for drinking, who exhibited splendid judgment and determination in all his other concerns, yet was flat on his back nevertheless. Let him tell you about it. I was much impressed with what you fellows said about alcoholism, and I frankly did not believe it would be possible for me to drink again. I rather appreciated your ideas about the subtle insanity that precedes the first drink, but I was confident it could not happen to me after what I had learned. I reasoned I was not so far advanced as most of you fellows, that I had been usually successful in licking my other personal problems, and that I would therefore be successful where you men failed. Fred's not too arrogant, is he? I felt I had every right to be self-confident, that it would be only a matter of exercising my willpower and keeping on guard. In this frame of mind. What frame of mind was Fred in? A self-willed frame of mind. He just said that. I went about my business for a time, all was well. I had no trouble refusing drinks and began to wonder if I had not been making too hard work of a simple matter. One day I went to Washington to present some accounting evidence to a government bureau. I had been out of town before during this particular dry spell, so there was nothing new about that. Physically, I felt fine. Neither did I have any pressing problems or worries. My business came off well. I was pleased and knew my partners would be too. It was the end of a perfect day, not a cloud on the horizon. Do you see what the book's trying to tell us? Fred's having a perfect day. Look at the squiggly writing. As I crossed the threshold of the dining room, the thought came to mind that it would be nice to have a couple of cocktails after dinner with dinner. That was all. Nothing more. Last paragraph. As soon as I regained my ability to think straight, I went carefully over that evening in Washington. Not only had I been off guard, I had made no fight whatever against the first drink. This time I had not thought of the consequences at all. I commenced to drink as carelessly as though the cocktails were ginger ale. I now remembered what my AA friends or alcoholic friends had told me, how they prophesied that if I had an alcoholic mind, the time and place would come I would drink again. And now we know that an alcoholic mind is a free mind that's free-willed. Let's turn over just for a minute to page 60. The first, second, third paragraph says, being convinced we were at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to God as we understood him. Just what do we mean by that? And just what do we do? Look at the next sentence. Page 60. The first requirement, there's a requirement for me to take step 3. The first requirement is that I be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. On that basis, I am almost always in collision with something or somebody, even if my motives are good. Do you guys know any unhappy people? Well, if self-will worked, you wouldn't know any. Nobody would will themselves to be unhappy. So it proves it right here. I can't be self-willed. Especially if you're one of us. I'm back on page 42, up at the top of the page. His AA friends, they had said that though I did raise a defense, it would one day give way before some trivial reason for having a drink. Well, just that did happen and more. But what I had learned of alcoholism did not occur to me at all. I knew from that moment that I had an alcoholic mind. I saw that willpower and self-knowledge would not help in those strange mental blank spots. What's a strange mental blank spot? You're walking down the street and you walk right into a sinkhole. For God's sakes. And you're sober when that happens. How can that be? I had never been able to understand people who said that a problem had them hopelessly defeated. I knew then it was a crushing blow. 2 members of Alcoholics Anonymous came to see me. They grinned, which I didn't like so well, so much. And then asked me if I thought myself an alcoholic and if I were really licked this time. I had to concede both propositions. Next paragraph. They outlined the spiritual answer and program of action, which 100 of them had followed successfully. Though I had been only a nominal churchman, their proposals were not intellectually hard to swallow. But the program of action, though entirely sensible, was pretty drastic. You must have saw 6 and 7 and 8 and 9, huh? It's pretty drastic. But listen, remember, Fred was on step none. Now look at the last paragraph at the bottom of 42. Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. This whole deal is about spiritual principles. I told you last week, if you practice spiritual principles, you're going to end up happy. God is the experience of principles applied. If I apply the principle, God will show up in my life. I have since been brought into a way of living infinitely more satisfying and I hope more useful than the life I lived before. My old manner of life was by no means a bad one, but I would not exchange its best moments for the worst I have now. I would not go back to it even if I could. Now, a lot of people, they read that and they think, well, I had fun drinking. Fred isn't saying he didn't have any fun drinking, but he damn sure didn't have any hope. And he says, his life is much more satisfying now. Last paragraph at the bottom of 43. Once more, Ray at certain times has no effective mental defense against the first drink, except in a few rare cases, neither Ray nor any other human being can provide such a defense. Ray's defense must come from a higher power. We're at page 43. And there were 7+ pages in the doctor's opinion, so that puts us at over 50. And we're still talking about step 1. And we just looked at page 60 and it said we were at step 3. Wow. There's over 53 pages in the first step. And in the next 50 pages, we cover the other 11. Why do you think they spent so much time on step 1? Let me read you why. I'm going to read to you out of the original manuscript. I'm going to go to the 5th chapter. It's not this in your book. This is the way Bill originally wrote it. And what it says is, our description of the alcoholic, the chapter to the agnostic, and our personal adventures before and after have been designed to sell you 3 pertinent ideas. A, that you are alcoholic and cannot manage your own life. B, that probably no human power can relieve your alcoholism. And C, that God can and will. Now here's what it says. He wasn't trying to be funny. If you are not convinced on these vital issues, you ought to reread the book to this point or else throw it away. If you don't believe step 1 applies to you, you are not going to do those other steps. You're not going to write a fearless, thorough inventory. You're not going to go make amends to everybody. You're not going to pray to God to remove your defects of character. They knew that. That's why they're taking so long with this one step. Because if you don't believe this step, you're in trouble. I didn't have any trouble believing in that first step. And if you just saw the way I drank, you'd know why. So let's turn to page 44. Chapter 4, we agnostics. But what I'm going to read you is the second half of step 1. In the preceding chapters, you have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we have made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. If, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only, ring around word is only, a spiritual experience will conquer. If you want to recover, there's no other way to do it. To one who feels he is an atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible, but to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death, step 1, or to live on a spiritual basis, step 2, are not always easy alternatives to face. Last paragraph on page 44. If a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, Ray would have recovered long ago. But Ray found that such codes and philosophies did not save him, no matter how much he tried. Ray could wish to be moral. He could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, he could will these things with all his might, but the needed power wasn't there. Ray's human resources, as marshaled by his will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. Lack of power, that was Ray's dilemma. He had to find a power by which he could live, and it had to be a power greater than Ray, obviously. But where and how was Ray to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable Ray to find a power greater than himself, which will solve his problem. Now let's go to page 52. This is still step one. Now we're talking about the unmanageability of our life. I'm reading the second full paragraph, the second sentence. Ray was having trouble with personal relationships. Ray couldn't control his emotional nature. Ray was prey to misery and depression. Ray couldn't make a living. Ray had a feeling of uselessness. Ray was full of fear. He was unhappy. He couldn't seem to be of real help to other people. They call these bedevilments. Now let me read the same thing I just read, but I'm going to read this when alcohol was still working. I treated my spiritual malady for many years with spirits, and it worked till it didn't. But when it did, Ray wasn't having trouble with personal relationships. He didn't care. He could control his emotional nature. He wasn't prey to misery and depression. He was happy. It didn't matter whether he did or didn't make a living. I didn't feel useless. I felt useful. I wasn't full of fear. I was happy. I wasn't unhappy. And I could be of help to everyone. That's the way I felt when alcohol worked. And when it stopped working, I went right back to these things. And he calls them right down there. They call these the bedevilments. We read Carl Jung's letter to Bill Wilson last week. And he talked about how man without some community or some higher thought helping us, that we're in trouble. And he calls this stuff very aptly the devil. I could not do the right thing. I couldn't. It wasn't that I never wanted to. I couldn't do it. So we've gone through all of this, and now we see this complete. We just completed step one. Now we're going to go to step two in the same chapter, we agnostics. Let's go to page 45, last paragraph. We know how Ray feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. Prejudice. This is right out of Webster's. A preconceived, usually unfavorable idea, an opinion that disregards fact. In this chapter, this is a 14-page chapter. The word prejudice is in this chapter 7 times. That's how prejudiced I was against God and religion. Some of us have been violently anti-religious. I'm on 45 again, right where we stopped. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him with which someone had tried to impress them during childhood. Perhaps we rejected this particular conception because it seemed inadequate. With that rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. Let's go on 46. Let's go to the middle, the paragraph in the middle of the page. Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to reassure you. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice, that's what he's going to ask us this, a whole bunch more in this chapter, and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than myself, I commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power which is God. Now look at what he just said. How many people are in AA trying to define or comprehend God? God's infinite. I'm finite. There's no way I can possibly define or comprehend God. He's way too big for that. That's not what we're talking about. When it says God as I understand him, it means my conception of that God. You know, if you look at in this chapter, there's a lot of words in the middle of sentences that are capitalized. Write all those words down and think of what they mean to you. He's trying to give us a concept of that power, creative intelligence. It has a whole bunch of them, but they're trying to help us. You know, let me go on a little bit and I'll tell you what happened to me with my sponsor. Much to my relief, I discovered I did not need to consider another's conception of God. My own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and to effect a contact with God. As soon as I admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, there's one of those capitalized words, a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of things, I began to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction. There's a promise right there. Provided I took other simple steps. We know what those steps are. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him. So that provided I took other simple steps, that's a warning. I got to do that. Top of 47. When therefore we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. This applies too to other spiritual expressions which you find in this book. Do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. Next paragraph. I needed to ask myself but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe that there is a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. Remember we read the spiritual experience? There's an asterisk here too, and it says, please be sure to read the spiritual experience, which we read last week. That's the third time he's told us to read that. That's very important that I read that and I understand what it's saying. Now, what's a cornerstone? Absolutely. It's almost the basis of the foundation, isn't it? Let's turn to page 75. Remember after step 5, we returned home and sat quiet for an hour looking at the first 5 proposals? Down at the bottom of 75, last 3 paragraphs. Are the stones properly in place? What the hell is he talking about? Well, we just read on page 47 about a cornerstone. Let's go back to page 12 in Bill's story. Squiggly writing, 1, 2, 3, the 4th paragraph. It was only a matter of being willing to believe in a power greater than myself. Nothing more was required of me to make my beginning. I saw that growth could start from that point. Upon a foundation of complete willingness, I might build what I saw in my friend. Would I have it? Of course I would. Step 1 is my foundation. Step 2 is my cornerstone. Turn to page 62. Last sentence on page 62. Most good ideas are simple, and this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. We built our spiritual structure. I now have a foundation, a cornerstone, and a keystone. And now I can do the rest of the steps and get rid of my spiritual malady. Does that make any sense to anyone in here? So that's
Right.
what he's trying to show us in this book that we're reading. Let's turn over to page 48. Second to last paragraph. Everybody nowadays believes in scores of assumptions of which there is good evidence, but no perfect visual proof. And does not science demonstrate that visual proof is the weakest proof? It is being constantly revealed as mankind studies the material world that outward appearances are not inward reality at all. To illustrate, the prosaic steel girder is a mass of electrons whirling around each other at incredible speed. What he's trying to say to us is, I can't see God. And he just told us visual proof's the weakest proof. I can experience and feel God, but I can't see him. But I live my life on that visual proof. These are spiritual exercises, these steps. And spiritual doesn't make sense. When I had a trouble with someone, I went right to them. AA doesn't tell me that. Says, no, go pick up Ralph and bring him to the meeting. What's Ralph got to do with what I'm telling you about? Spiritual life is not a theory. I have to live it. And I can't think it. I can't outthink it. I'm not gonna. Spirituality doesn't make sense. Remember the place in the book where he says common sense thus becomes uncommon sense? This is what we're talking about. This is what he's talking about and what we're reading right now. Look at the middle of 49, that paragraph. Instead of regarding myself as an intelligent agent, spearhead of God's ever-advancing creation, I chose to believe that my human intelligence was the last word, the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and end of all. Rather vain of me, wasn't it? What's an agent? An agent gets empowered. If I'm representing you, you empower me to represent you. If I want power, it says at the bottom of 62, he's going to be the principal. I'm going to be his agent. God's going to empower me if I represent him, if I demonstrate what I've learned from you guys. When I started this whole thing, I was going to say, my name's Ray. I'm here to represent God, but you guys would have thrown me out. But that's what I'm doing. But so an agent, you empower the agent to represent you. You tell them what you want them to do. And that's what I do today. I try to listen to God and do what I believe he wants me to do. And that's what it's saying. That's what it's saying in what I just read. Does that make sense to anyone here? We who have traveled, I'm on 49 now. We who have traveled this dubious path beg you to lay aside prejudice. How many times is he going to say that? Even against organized religion. We have learned that whatever the human frailties of various faiths may be, those faiths have given purpose and direction to millions. People of faith have a logical idea what life is all about. Actually, I used to have no reasonable conception whatever. I used to amuse myself by cynically dissecting spiritual beliefs and practices when I might have observed that many spiritually minded persons of all races, colors, and creeds were demonstrating a degree of stability, happiness, and usefulness, which I should have sought myself. I lived my life drinking, cheating, and lying to all the people that love me. And I'm judging these people, these spiritual people, thinking they're weak. I mean, when you live your life the way I live my life, how can you judge anyone? Flip back to page 19 for a minute. Okay. Yeah, no, absolutely. Got on a roll, Jimmy. Bottom of 19, just for 1 second. Most of us sense that real tolerance of other people's shortcomings and viewpoints and a respect for their opinions are attitudes which make us more useful to others. I try to respect and be tolerant of other people's differences from me. That's what I'm supposed to do, this book is telling me. And it works. And I've taken up too much time. I can't help it. I get stuck in this stuff. But I want you to know I love this book, and it changed fundamentally who I am. And thank you all for coming.
Ray,
Thanks, Ray. Thanks, Ramey.
Ray, do we get to ask questions for a second? Ray, is there time for questions?
I don't know if they can hear you. I don't
Ray
know.
cannot hear you
Good to
guys.
see you, Mike.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Hi, Jimmy.
Thanks, Ramey.
Thanks, Ray.
Thank you so much, Ray.
Thank you for joining. If anyone
you
has
all for
questions
being
about the
here
Wilson
doing
House,
this
I
for
can hear
us.
you.
So, honey.
Thank you all. God bless.